Project Hail Mary is the latest book by Andy Weir that's being made into a movie. It is a book I've rather enjoyed and part of a new wave of writers bucking the traditional publishing process. Coming to crossover view in the Washington Post by Mary Robinette Kowal, President of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America, who's also the author of the Lady Astronaut series, Calculating the Stars or something like that. And I took particular issues with this particular review. You'll soon see why.
There's a lot of refrigerator logic in Project Hail Mary.
Mary is trying to say in a roundabout way there's a lot of plot contrivances or logical inconsistencies in Project Hail Mary. I do not believe that this is the correct way to go about an article talking about any book with this framing before you really get into the actual contents of the book. But that will become very apparent as I go on in the article.
Let's start with the opening. The main character, Ryland Grace, wakes up in a white room with no idea of why he's there or even his name is. Even if amnesia is a bit cliche, it's still fun to watch Grace figure out everything. He's clever too.
While not necessarily a criticism, there are a lot of word choices and odd phrasing in this review that start in this section that makes me think she's is cleverly using rhetoric to not insult the book writing.
But his cleverness seems to be the weakness of this novel, because there are so many parts of the narrative that seem to exist only to show off this quality.
Just like with refrigerator logic, Mary is framing something that shouldn't be a criticism, clever, into one before she really even gets into her problems that she alludes to in this Washington Post article. Andy Weir's Project Hail Mary is a bestseller, but it also has some problems.
Let me start with a simple example. Grace is on a spaceship mission in which they put people into a coma, knowing their brains might be mush when they wake up. It's an interesting premise that carries an inherent tension.
This might seem like she's being positive about the book here, but no. Paying close attention, there's no part she has said anything good about the book. This review is constructed in such a way that makes it seem like she could be saying that by throwing phrasing like interesting premise that carries an inherent tension. Even in the end of the first paragraph of the review, she writes, "It's a fun idea, and Weir knows all about how to ratchet up the excitement. But the novel seems to be written to be a movie. And in fact, it's being made into one, starring Ryan Gosling. Oh boy, perhaps just wait for that." Is this Mary clearly signaling or dog whistling right from the start that this isn't a good book? See what I did there? I didn't actually directly say that's what she was doing, but it definitely left the impression that was the case. But it almost seems like she's heavily hinting that it doesn't live up to the premise and doesn't take advantage of the story setup. And the very fact she thinks Hollywood will make it better in any way at all, at this point, let's just say that is very telling.
But there's an essential element missing. When astronauts are sent out, there are no checklists. If you know anything about NASA or flying or the military or hospitals, etc., then you know that checklists are essential and baked into the culture. Checklists are there to ensure every aspect of complicated aerospace feats can go off safely. Without them, something's likely to go wrong. Guess what happens in Project Hail Mary?
I'll answer Mary's leading question. Things go wrong. I hate poisoning the well like this article is trying to do with such rhetoric, so I wanted to present enough of it to state that this whole article comes off as a passive-aggressive dig at both Weir and his book. So far, she hasn't even talked about the book, just her feelings about it and her impressions. Mary leaves out critical details that lead to this haphazard mission that practically invalidates this non-criticism. The ship that is built in the novel has to take Grace and potentially 2 other crew members to a whole new star system that has to self-sustain for at least 3 years, meaning any type of checklist Mary is talking about is fairly useless at the point where the story starts off at. Also, the fact that there is something very similar to the checklist in the story, just not the typical type of checklist Mary believes should be in the story, when I see no reason for it. In fact, it doesn't make much sense in the story. It makes me think that she has a very rigid mindset or is being dishonest in order to create a certain narrative in this review of a potential rival's novel. Talking about what is the process at Real Life Institute is a non-point. One of the plot points, and something that is explained rather well in the book, is the ship is being loaded up with everything they could possibly need to solve any problem that the crew would come across. Because the crew, upon reaching the star system, would have to figure out on their own how they could potentially solve the problem of Earth's crisis. Following a checklist could even possibly hinder the crew of this Hail Mary play Earth is throwing at a distant star system in hope, a small hope, finding a theoretical solution to an issue that might cause the next ice age on Earth. And given the person in charge of the project, that is actually very likely the case, given what the audience learn about that particular character.
It may seem like a small thing, but the lack of checklists is what sets everything in motion. Weir has built his career on accuracy, so this is a strange oversight.
No, it isn't what sets anything in motion, and Weir did not build his career on accuracy. It is correct to write that he was very accurate in his depiction of NASA in his breakout hit The Martian, but Project Hail Mary is a different book with a different plot. I can't believe the writer of this article, Mary, who's been writing for many years and who's actually won several awards for her stories, and that is the president of the SFWA, actually believes accuracy is what made Weir's career. I'm only an amateur writer, and that's so incredibly reductive and simple-minded. That's also probably why the quality of these award-winning books that have been winning all these Hugo, Nebula, which her group runs, and some other stuff, has been declining in the last decade as far as I'm concerned.
This isn't about insider knowledge like walking in a 260-pound Orlando suit in 1.4G is implausible at best. People can do extreme things in the moments of crisis. Characters can be exceptional, but leaving out the checklist is building an entire space mission to be stupid so you can have your main character be clever. Only the checklist that appears in the novel is in a flashback to a test on Earth.
Yes, most readers won't care about a checklist. It might even bloat the story with unnecessary information. And in this novel, it wouldn't even necessarily make logical sense given who leads the project. So, Mary linking this perceived problem could possibly be the reason she's harping on this checklist point so much. But there might be another reason to it, but I don't want to go into personal theories until the end of this video. It should be marked. Still, she's prefacing the criticism without establishing why it is a problem in the book.
Grace has to be clever about things he absolutely should not need to be clever about. Here's an example. The ship is designed to suppress gravity through constant thrust or through centrifugal force. Without one of those things, you get 0G. There's a countdown timer when the engine cuts off will occur, which gives him close to 6 days of warning before it'll happen. Somehow this very clever character threading about 0G, and yet he doesn't fasten his seatbelt. He panics, he vomits, all the gears he pulls out, and Categorize is now floating haphazardly along the ship. Dummy, I say to myself. I really should have seen that coming. Yes, you should have. This feels like a manufactured crisis to show the character cleverly solving something that didn't need to be solved.
How is this a manufactured crisis? Does this present a major threat to his life or maybe the safety of the ship? Not really. And how does this make Grace seem clever at all? He is portrayed more as someone who is very ruled by his emotions. And given what I know of Weir and the book, is probably suffering from a host of mental troubles, even if it's not directly stated in the novel. The stress of the situation would take a toll on anyone, even without the brain damage that Grace reportedly has. Just because she throws the word clever into the article, it doesn't mean anything when the example she uses makes her think dummy. This is more of an example of Grace's personality than being shown in the book, than really Weir trying to give him a moment to be clever or anything else like that. And this article is how someone looking for a problem in any given piece of media will latch onto any little point they think that they can use to create a certain narrative, where Mary can actually use facts from the story honestly to paint a very different experience than someone who was reading the book would experience. But she is a writer after all, award-winning one at that, and president of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America. So I am sure she knows how to at least do that. And she really should know the impact that it will have on people who read it with those facts in mind.
At another point, Grace does this long experiment to figure out how heavy something is. Then he realized he didn't need to because it was labeled. Silly him. Elsewhere, he needs to work the spin drive. For the first time, we get to see Grace figure out what the spin drive is and how it works. Again, there's a appealing lack of checklists. The computer AI appears to have less capability than the average smartphone. Grace has to figure out what the thing is and how it works, which he cleverly does.
Notice how Mary never explains how the checklist that she keeps bringing up would help with any of these issues. It is oddly placed in the review along with appalling abuse of the word clever. You would think someone like Mary would be aware of how her words would come across to fans of science fiction novels in a review like this. As a review, it seems more about her hang up on the lack of checklist than the context of the book, or the story at all. Reminds me a bit of the article Xbox Series X has too many horrifying holes. But that might seem like an exaggeration. Still, as far as I'm concerned, it has about the same amount of critical appeal to it. So I find it a apt comparison, if not worse, due to her position of power in the industry.
Disguising exposition through actions is standard sci-fi technique. These scenes have little emotional weight and slow down the pacing of the story.
This is an oversimplified generalization that lumps Weir in with traditional science fiction writers, which he is not. He took the self-published route to his rise to becoming the author he is. But I will not say that Weir doesn't follow any of the traditional methods found in history. He admits in many interviews he was inspired by a lot of writers, but that is not where his background has led him. And due to his first-person perspectives that he writes from, most of his disguise and exposition through action helps gives the reader an idea about Grace's personality and, in some cases, even other characters in the story. In other words, he works character development into this type of exposition that most traditional science fiction writers don't really focus much on. Besides, this is almost a non sequitur that isn't really explained why it's here. It comes off as Mary trying to poison the well with just another snide, almost unrelated point.
Deeper into the book, where no checklist could possibly prep him for what happens, the novel picks up pace and challenges get significantly more interesting. And yet, weird plot holes abound. Like Grace wasn't originally supposed to go on the mission, so why do they have his name on the mission patch? Why is he comfortable with spacewalking? Every astronaut I've spoken to says that neutral buoyant lab is absolutely not like being in space. It's just the best thing we have.
Fact Mary is calling these plot holes is just a little disappointing. She's making it out like it's weird that his outfit was made on short notice with his name on it. It is not. It is weirder that it fit him so well, but given the leader of this project, it might make sense that he would be the backup of the backup. And even send that aside, replacing the name patch would be much easier than retailing a jumpsuit which was made on such short notice or anything like that. It's not even really short notice. But even that isn't anywhere close to being unrealistic given the circumstances of the story. Personally, the bigger plot contrivance, not plot hole mind you, is more about the stupid circumstances that led to him, Grace, being chose to fill the vacant position on the crew of the Hail Mary. Yet she does not bring that point up at all. To the other issue, why is he comfortable spacewalking despite astronauts talking about it not being the same? I can't confirm if any of this is true or not. I don't know who she talked to. Yet I doubt many people in the audience would know about this. Just like with her continuously bringing up that checklist that she is harping on about, that Mary doesn't even explain how it would actually solve any of the problems in the novel. On top of this, she doesn't really go into how these plot holes actually affect the book at all, because frankly, none of these seem to actually matter. Almost seems like Mary is trying to make a case that, in her mind at least, that if it's not realistic, it's a problem. But I don't actually see how this is a problem in a fictional book with a fictional scenario with pretty solid science, which Weir researches pretty well and has pre-readers go over it to correct his work. And frankly, I don't see how that this is the case because she isn't explaining at all. She's like plot hole bad. Not the reason the plot hole's bad. Not that it's even a plot hole. Contrivance at best. I pointed out more of a plot contrivance than her. But I guess she's just trying to build a case for her refrigerator logic that she sets up in the very beginning of the article. Most cases of the plot contrivance can be justified by the actual details of the book, and Mary isn't really bringing up any of that context or any real examples of them in this article.
How can the aliens have robots if they never developed computers? Why do the living quarters have so much empty space? Another problem involves a bit of a spoiler, but I don't think of a way to discuss it without this reveal, and I think it needs to be discussed.
Again, I don't agree that these are plot holes. Even calling them plot contrivances is sort of a stretch. The closest thing that can be called one in her list of plot contrivances is the robot one. And realistically, that can be explained by what we know of the alien race and what we know of current human technology. Cranes don't need computers to be used on construction yards. Same goes with most similar mechanical devices used pretty much before the widespread use of computers. They just need an operator to work the controls. This is almost like saying a car can't run without computers. And given what the audience learns about the alien race, most readers won't even think about it. And if they do, it might just make sense to them given the facts presented in the novel, and hopefully they might have the basic amount of knowledge of the real world to resolve how the alien race could create such a robot and not be unaware of these technology as Mary comes off here in this article. Now, there are some questions I have in relations to the alien species technology, but she picks some of the poorest examples to cite.
Grace encounters an alien species that's also spacefaring and sapient. Upon meeting beings he observes, no one ever talks about the real hard part of first contact with intelligent alien life. Pronouns. I'm gonna go with he for now because it just seems rude to call a thinking being it. Let's unpack that for a moment. There are only two pronouns that occur to Grace are he and it.
This is a lie by omission. There's a line shortly before this sentence that disproves that. I say his hand, but maybe it's her hand, or another pronoun. They might have 17 biological species for all I know. That is the line Mary conveniently omits from this that would make her look dishonest to anyone who read the book and read this review like myself.
There are only two pronouns that occur to Grace are he and it. He's a molecular biologist turned middle school teacher in the 21st century. He should know better. He couldn't think she or they. In fact, the species are hermaphrodites, and they don't gender themselves.
This is why Grace had the thought he did, a line Mary conveniently omits to ask this question. And really, what is she trying to say about this line? That using the pronoun they should be how middle school teachers of the 21st century should think about in regards to gender? It's almost like she thinks it's unrealistic that any teacher wouldn't be well accustomed and get their brain flowing process to think this way. Even a biologist, because frankly, sorry to say, many biologists have a certain view on sex and gender that might oppose Mary's delicate sensibilities and her rigid worldview.
Then there's a passage with the only major female character, Eva Straat, a Dutch scientist who oversees the program behind the spacecraft Hail Mary that Grace will be aboard with two other scientists to determine if a star might have answers to save life on Earth. My guidelines were that all candidates must be heterosexual male, Straat says. Why not all heterosexual women, Grace asks. Straat, the vast majority of scientists and trained astronaut candidates are men. It's not the world we live in. Don't like it? Encourage your female students to get into STEM. I'm not here to enact social equality. I'm here to do whatever's necessary to save humanity. There is no reason for this to be in the book. The author chose to put these words in the mouth of the only major female character. But having the head of a multinational task force raise the argument gives it the veneer of validity. These authorial choices are so frustrating because they aren't necessary and just reinforce the idea of space exploration being for men, and straight men at that.
Setting aside the fact that Mary's wrong about Straat being a scientist, she is not. The fact that she states that Eva Straat is the only major female character is a bit misleading. There are only 3 major characters in this book by my approximation: Grace, Straat, and the alien. So, 1 man, 1 woman, and a agender hermaphrodite alien. There are many female characters in the book, even one that ends up on the crew of the Hail Mary despite this scene. Actually, that's what prompted this scene. And another one who's a backup for the Black American scientist who's picked to go on the mission. She explains why she picks him over the woman rather gracefully. Grace even makes a joke about this fact, a black guy, and it's a little crude humor, and it's all in good humor. But Strat's reason has nothing to do with sexism or any bigot bias. She's looking at this mission very analytically. She wants things to be done that have solid backing, and this sort of just reinforces her amoral ethics in not caring about politics to just save humanity. That is a very core element of this character, willing to do anything that gives her a slight edge of making this mission successful. You don't have to agree with this logic as a reader, as Grace clearly doesn't, and even teases her a bit for it. But by the numbers, more men have the experience needed to do the mission, so Strat wants to go with the numbers, and she has concerns with other things when it comes to sexuality and the interaction of men and women on a long suicide mission. The framing here that Mary does of Strat and Grace in this book is very simple-minded reading of the interaction between the two in the novel. Not to mention how much context is cut out of this book to make that limited and rather biased assessment. There's a very good reason that they need to put the crew in a coma, and that's psychological reasons that I won't be spoiling, but the data's there that has Strat seeming to be under the belief that sexual tension among the crew would increase the psychological stress and tension among them for this suicide mission, by the way. Based on the science presented in the book, it would be an unneeded rest that Strat believes to be avoided if possible. It isn't possible, so the line Mary cites from the book is in reaction to Grace teasing her about her so-called sexism. Of course, out of context, this might seem like a bad thing, especially with how Mary is sort of ramping up the framing and narrative in this review. The more dishonest part about this is her ending with the statement, "For her to say that just reinforces the idea of space exploration being for men, and straight men at that." And that is completely incorrect reading of this. The more honest way of phrasing this would be, these authorial choices make the leader of the world-saving mission a woman who doesn't care about social issues and is only guided by well-founded, provable facts is frustrating because they aren't necessary. They just reinforce the idea that being sent on a suicidal mission in an unexplored solar system where insanity and or death is highly likely due to the search for a theoretical solution of a extinction level threat being only for men, and straight men at that. That's a much more accurate depiction of Mary's sentences that reflects the truth of the book and sort of reflects the truth of Earth's history. Men being sent on suicidal missions seems par to course as far as I know historically.
Watching him get excited about the idea and chasing it down is a delight. Rocky, when you meet him, is a beautifully constructed alien.
Notice how Mary doesn't say she actually likes the book at all, and also how she uses the pronoun for he for the alien, even though she already stated that the alien is a hermaphrodite, but let's set that aside. Overall, the language of this article is very carefully phrased that way in order not to come off as critical as it really is. It's like she's saying, I understand why people, with the possible subtext, who aren't as clever as me, like this book. But do I agree it's a good book?
Central tension, will Grace figure things out, should have been based on a real problem, instead of a series of incidents that could have been solved with checklists and simple common sense.
Yeah, she never explains how. I don't even see how, based on the line, should have been based on a real problem. Makes it seems like she's critical of it because it was actually about a fictional problem that we're made up, evolving an alien life form that we're made up. But I really can't be sure of that because of how vague the statement comes off as. And of course, again, at the end, she has to repeatedly assert that a checklist would have solved any of the actual problems. I don't know. She doesn't explain. I don't understand how any of this could actually solve the fictional problem that both the Earth and Grace have to figure out how to fix. It frankly comes off as a little absurd and stuck up. There really is no way they could have predicted what sort of solution the crew of the Hail Mary would have had to come up with, even if they did manage to reach their goal alive to actually save the Earth. This is why it's Project Hail Mary. It's a Hail Mary play.
That said, you'll probably enjoy reading it anyways, at least until you've reached the refrigerator.
Yeah, I did, and many others did also. I'm sure there's some people who didn't enjoy it. The style is sort of a new thing, has been making its rounds for the last few decades. The first point of view with the sort of pop culture references. I understand why people hate it because of freaking how bad Ready Player One sort of pulled that off. But Weir's probably the lightest touch when it comes to that. Yeah, I did, and many others did also. I'm sure there's some people who didn't enjoy it. The style is sort of a new thing, has been making its rounds for the last few decades. The first point of view with the sort of pop culture references. I understand why people hate it because of freaking how bad Ready Player One sort of pulled that off. But Weir's probably the lightest touch when it comes to that. And frankly, it's her reaching for trying to make this supposedly refrigerator logic is almost laughable. She tries to do it in this very carefully calculated and crafted article that seems to obfuscate much of what's actually in the book. It focuses more on insignificant details to create problems that aren't there. Now, I'm not going to say that the book was perfect and without flaws, but really not much of what Mary brought up was actually them in the end. I don't think a checklist would have been a solution for any of them. Maybe if she would have explained it, I could understand, but she never does. She just takes it as an assumption. Frankly, maybe a user manual for the ship would have been a sensible idea for the crew who, by the studies, would have most likely woken up with some sort of brain damage from their 3-year comas. That's something people criticize it for. Could have been done another way? Maybe. The coma thing itself has some glaring issues. That is one of the points she could have brought up that I could have agreed with if she would have proposed actual solutions to that. I can't be sure it was a plot contrivance, but even if you consider it a plot contrivance, generally plot contrivances sometimes are needed for certain story setups, and if things went well with the crew of 3, the book wouldn't have turned out if they were all alive in the end. It was an author choice that I can't agree or disagree with. It would definitely be a different book if all 3 members survived. And there were some scenes that were clearly set up with humor in mind that really might have come off as not as believable and sort of artificial in some ways because of how ridiculous they were for the sake of humor. But even in those scenes that might come off as a little absurd, they still built characters up in an interesting way that could be off-putting to some people, but I personally enjoyed. I say all this, but I'm looking at the book from a storyteller's perspective, along with a couple of other perspectives that I work into it. But this is not about how I would review it. It's about how Mary, president of the SFWA, is looking at it. And if I was to guess, I would say that Mary was looking at the novel from a feminist perspective. I'll even go as far as say intersectional feminist critical perspective, given her bringing up the pronoun they. Now, I have no problem with people actually doing it. It's good to get different perspectives, even if they are from a singular lens. But generally, I like people to explain that's what they're doing. Mary never does it. She does this under the guise of being a serious, scholarly writer. And frankly, that seems a little deceptive. Maybe this is something that most people familiar with her and her works might know she would do in such a situation. But given this was a review written and published in the Washington Post, most reader looking into it for reviews might come across it without knowing anything about that. Most people wouldn't even think to look at who wrote the article. And still they would believe it has some credibility because it was published by the Washington Post. Although, what people say about the news nowadays, I could be wrong. Mary even tries to hide any link to her rather apparent perspective in the second paragraph with a friend of mine who teaches scriptwriting talks about refrigerator logic, elements that don't bother you until after the movie's over. Again, with the movie narrative. And you go over to the refrigerator and say, hey, wait a minute. Refrigerator logic is even worse than a novel. Frankly, if I'm trying to be good faith about this, maybe the things are interconnected in his mind. I don't know. Some people live their life through a singular lens and that's all they care about. But I try to keep a more open mind than most people and shift my view, even though I do have a personal preference for what I think is the most useful in any given situation. But if that interpretation is true, that sort of is a real problem. Standards in writing should not be tied to any ideology at all that is out there. Not even one so highly praised as feminism. The feminist perspective does have a place in a sort of meta-analysis when trying to consider all the freaking factors, how a feminist could read this book, but letting this perspective color the entire review, as I believe it did in this case, is rather flawed and extremely biased to a extreme degree in the way Mary went about it does not frame it anywhat well in my mind. Add in the fact that Mary completely omitted the fact that Grace wondered about the gender of the alien, and that alien could have been her as a pronoun or a completely different gender alien to humans' understanding of biology, which would be interesting to Grace to think about. And why would he immediately go to they? That seems a little odd to me. And it really shows the limit of Mary's perspective. To me, it seems like maybe it was the fact that Grace chose the word he for the alien because it was a much easier thing for him to do given certain elements of the book. From a psychological perspective, this completely makes sense. Grace didn't want to refer to the alien as it, and it already had the name Rocky in his mind due to some characterizations of the character he picked up from his sight organs, as they say in the book. But the real issue is how Mary reacts to this completely understandable thought process of Grace and how she doesn't take any of these factors in mind. Overall, a lot of writers do not take the psychological or character factorization into their sort of assessment. It's notorious in the science fiction overall. Freaking three-body problem. Everyone who even liked the book admitted these characters are flat, boring, but they still gave it the award of the year for that book despite all the other problems in this book. I will be coming soon for you. Three-body problem. It has a lot of problems and they are a little difficult to point out. But back to this. Mary believes that Grace, a teacher in the 21st century, shouldn't be thinking about gender in this completely natural way. Says a lot about her worldview and how rigid and unrealistic as it comes across, despite that being seemingly part of the overall criticism up to this point. Lack of realism. Her idea of realism seems rather skewed. That same hindrance extends further when talking about the only major female character, Eva Strat. Mary seems to think that putting a woman like Strat in a position of power in the book was a problem of some sort. Why? Because Strat followed a fictional science of the world depicted in Project Hail Mary that seems to follow many of the same facts of our real world. I'm sure that if there was more heterosexual females educated in STEM field and could handle the strain of astronaut training program, she would have surely went with that instead. But the book closely follows the rules of the real world and the real life biology of men and women. Cherry picking that one line for Eva Strat does not accurately represent her. If I had to guess her problem with Strat, it would be because Strat is not a feminist. That might be simplifying it a bit, but that's the only reason I can think of. That could be the cause. If you have a better interpretation of that, put it in the comments. You have this woman given authority to pretty much do anything she deems necessary to get this ship built in a timely manner and give it the highest probabilities of succeeding at all costs, no matter how much of a hopeless task it seems to be. It's true, the character could have been a male, but Weir chose to make the character a woman. Why does it make a difference? I see it sort of the yin and yang, the emotional male, contrasted to the cold, calculating Strat, but that's just my interpretation of it. It seems to me the baseline criticism would have been the same no matter the sex of Strat. Again, this is just guessing. Maybe Mary's problem with this is having a male author writing a woman like this and putting the words in the mouth of a woman character that could be perceived as sexist. And that's her major issue with this. And frankly, that baffles me a bit. It seems a bit sexist. This almost seems offensive to Mary because she showed no sense of being a feminist, and that seemed to be her problem with the character, I'm guessing. It really seems a little backwards to me. Mary's basically saying a woman character should not have the same role as a male character could have, or something equally as stupid. Now this one's out here. Or maybe Mary believes, as the president of the SFWA, that, she should have some say about what writers should be able to write and not write for some reason. Frankly, I'm surprised the book was even nominated for Best Novel in the Nebula Awards that the organization that she is president of, that they give out. Maybe public demands forced her to put it in the running, but that does not mean she has to be nice to it. For her to come out in her position and write an article that misrepresents much of the story and tries to unfairly say it has refrigerator logic, which there is very little in this book overall. There is definitely more in a three-body problem as far as I'm concerned, and potentially try to sway those who like actual hard science fiction and maybe those who have more of a feminist leaning among the science fiction communities. Seems rather unethical. Now, I might not have as much writing experience as Mary. I only do it as a fun hobby. My experience in education has given me a broader skill set. Rhetoric and marketing are some of the areas that I feel I had my best success for. I have at least a novice level of skills in writing and acting. Also, my analyst tends to be a little outside the box, but sort of the core of that sort of place of where I decided I'm going to do criticism from sort of weaves together many elements and almost uses psychology as its basis. This is why this review and the other reviews sort of really annoys me. It tries to look at it from a realistic perspective that Weir is known for, cast doubt on it despite the amount of research and thought put into the book. And frankly, some of Mary's nitpicks could have been correct, but the lack of context in other areas and what she omits from the book sort of has me doubting even the honesty of those claims she makes. From a psychological reading of the book, it is very doubtful Eva Stratt would have wanted to rely on any standards that can be found in our modern day culture. She is a character who does not care how things are traditionally done. She thinks very little of the bullshit and red tape that slows down most political actions and everything overall. Definitely anti-authority in every way, and she's in a position to take advantage of that. Even an interesting courtroom scene which is quite amusing, but it does fit. The character of Stratt is very solidly constructed from both a psychological and storytelling perspective. The need to have her as a woman has a play with the yin and yang perspective, but that's just from the storytelling perspective, and that's harder to really nail down. If there is any sense of realism that's breached in this novel, is just the simple fact that the governments of the world would hand over all the authority of the world to such a woman, or any woman in that regards. For Mary to ignore all that and not even hint that in her review makes me think she doesn't care for either of those different types of perspective, that she has a strong bias against the author and or his less traditional type of science fiction novel writing, or possibly very likely that she has a motive for writing this, hidden motive for writing up this, what I would call a hit piece on the book. This is all me guessing. It's really impossible for me to tell for sure, but I'm sort of leaning a certain way given certain factors, but this really isn't a place for such speculation. There's probably more I could elaborate on, but I'm done.